I want to be honest about what I was before everything broke. I was the kind of man who set his alarm 20 minutes early so he could have Vivian's coffee ready before she woke up. Vivian was the most beautiful woman I had ever met, and for 3 years I had been quietly, completely devoted to her. Not because she asked. Because I liked watching her drink it while she checked her phone, and I liked being the person who had made the morning slightly easier for someone I loved. That was the whole economy of me for 3 years. Find the thing that needed doing. Do it quietly. Ask for nothing back. I was the kind of man who answered emails at midnight when he didn't have to, because the project was important to the company, and the company was important to Vivian's family, and Vivian's family was important to Vivian, and Vivian was important to me. That chain made everything important. It also made me a very useful person to have around, in the way a good tool is useful, something you rely on and stop noticing. At Chew Capital, her father's firm, the kind of company where who you knew mattered more than what you knew, I was known as Vivian's boyfriend. That was my primary credential. My secondary credential was that I was good at the work, genuinely good, the kind of good that makes people slightly uncomfortable because it raises the question of why you're not in a different room. I stayed in the room I was in. I stayed quiet. I was patient, in the way that people mistake for virtue, when actually it is fear in a longer coat. I want you to understand that I do not tell you this to ask for sympathy. I tell you this because the distance between who I was and who I became is the whole story, and if you don't know where I started, you won't understand why the ending meant anything. Let me tell you about the project first. 18 months of work. A full competitive landscape analysis for a regional expansion, 7 markets, 3 years of data, a proprietary valuation model I built from scratch. I stayed late for 462 days of the 18 months. I know the exact number because I have always been the kind of person who keeps records, even when no one will ever check them. The presentation happened on a Tuesday. I was not in the room. I found out about it at 2 in the afternoon, when an email went out congratulating the Strategic Initiatives Division on an outstanding collaborative analysis. The lead credit went to Adrian Zhao. Adrian was the heir to the Zhao Group, the largest private conglomerate in the country, a man who had walked into Chew Capital 6 months earlier as an external strategic partner, and immediately became the most important person in every room he entered. My name appeared on page 11 of the appendix, in a list of contributing analysts. I read the email 3 times. I noted the language. I closed my laptop. I said nothing because I had been saying nothing for 3 years and I was very good at it. He was charming and confident and entirely incurious about the details of anything he presented, which should have told me more than I allowed myself to notice. I filed it. I went back to work. I was good at that. Vivian called me on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the presentation. "I want to do something special for your birthday," she said. "Everyone will be there. I want it to be a night you remember." I believed her. I want you to understand that I believed her completely, because I had no framework for what she was actually planning, and because I am the kind of person who, when someone I love tells me they want to do something special for me, does not run the analysis first. I just feel it. My birthday was on a Saturday. The venue was a private dining room at a restaurant I had never been able to afford on my own salary. There were 40 people there, Vivian's family, her friends, colleagues from the company, people from Chew Capital's orbit. I walked in and felt, for a single, intact moment, like someone who was worth celebrating. I should have noticed the seating. I was at the far end of the table in the seat nearest the door, with people around me I barely knew. Vivian was at the center, next to her father, next to Adrian. I noticed. I arranged an explanation for it in my head. It did not survive the next 45 minutes. Bernard Chew, Vivian's father, the man who had built Chew Capital from nothing, and had never once let anyone forget it, stood up at 8:47 p.m. "Tonight," he said, "we are celebrating not one occasion but two. My daughter's birthday plans have given us the perfect setting to share some wonderful news." He paused, with the timing of a man who had practiced the pause. Vivian and Adrian will be married in the spring. The room applauded. Vivian smiled the way she always smiled in photographs, precisely, correctly, at exactly the right angle. Adrian stood and reached for her hand, and she gave it to him in a way that told me this hand-giving was not new. I sat at the far end of the table and watched the room celebrate something that had been decided while I was answering emails at midnight, while I was building the model that Adrian had presented as a collaboration, while I was making Vivian's coffee at 6:15 in the morning because I liked watching her drink it. I sat there for 4 minutes. I counted them. Then I stood up, said, "Excuse me," to the 2 people near me who had already stopped listening and walked out into the night. Nobody followed me. Nobody noticed I was gone for at least 4 minutes. I know because I stopped on the pavement outside and looked back through the window at the room, and not a single face had turned toward the door. I walked home. It was 47 minutes. I counted those too. I sat in my apartment for a long time that night. I did not drink. I did not break anything. I did not call anyone, because there was no one to call who was not in that room or connected to someone in that room. I thought about the last 3 years with the precise, unwanted clarity that arrives when you stop explaining something away. I thought about the emails and the early mornings and the 462 late nights and the model on page 11. I thought about all the things I had accepted because I had decided they were temporary inconveniences in a life that was building towards something good. I thought about the fact that I had been wrong about that, and that the wrongness was complete, and that the version of my life I had been constructing had never existed outside my own head. At some point around 3 in the morning, something appeared in the lower left corner of my vision. I blinked. It stayed. It was text, clean and white, like a notification rendered directly onto my field of view. Asterisk architect system calibration complete. Asterisk asterisk 0 point established. Asterisk asterisk initiating. Asterisk I stared at it. It did not disappear. It pulsed once gently and then a second line appeared beneath the first. Asterisk welcome Ren Xiao, you have reached the floor. There is only one direction from here. Asterisk I sat with that for a moment. Then I thought, fine, let's see what this is. I will not pretend the first few days with the system were comfortable. They were not. It is one thing to be analytical. It is another to have every piece of information you encounter presented with its full network of implications visible, connections, patterns, vulnerability windows, the precise shape of what a situation is really about beneath what it appears to be about. I went back to read Adrian's presentation with the system active. Every place where my analysis had been simplified. Every conclusion restated in terms that sounded more confident because they had been made less specific. The entire model, repackaged to look like it, had emerged from a room of people rather than one desk at midnight. The system showed me something else too. The Zhao Group, the empire behind Adrian's name, with holdings in manufacturing, logistics, and 3 major financial institutions, was carrying a problem it had buried very carefully. Across 3 shell entities in 2 offshore jurisdictions, there was a debt position that did not match the group's reported leverage ratios. Approximately 1.6 billion in undisclosed exposure. If a specific set of market conditions aligned and the system assessed that probability at 73% within 9 months, the exposure would become catastrophic. I looked at this for a long time. I ran the analysis again. The system confirmed it. I thought, so this is where we are. I took 1 week to do nothing. I used the week the way you close a wound, not because the wound is finished, but because you need the surface sealed before you can do anything else. I felt what I had lost, completely and deliberately, as the last act of generosity I intended to extend to anyone in that room. Then I got to work. Selene Park was the sharpest analyst I had ever met, and the only person at Chu Capital who had ever treated me like a colleague instead of a convenience. I had known her for 2 years, in the way you know someone when you work in the same building and both understand that most of what goes on around you is political theater rather than actual work. She had left Chu Capital 6 months before I was pushed out, which told me everything I needed to know about her judgment. She was operating independently, taking contract work, and she was exactly the person I needed. I called her on a Tuesday. I told her I had a position thesis, and I needed a partner with clean credentials and no connection to the Chu or Zhao names. She said, "Is this legal?" I said, "Yes." She said, "How sure are you about the thesis?" I said, 73% confident, 9-month window, 1.6 billion in undisclosed exposure. I can show you the documentation. There was a pause, then she said, "I'll look at the documentation. If it holds, I'm in." The documentation held. She called me back in 48 hours and said, "When do we start?" We rented an office the size of a walk-in closet in the financial district. We built the position slowly, under 8 separate accounts across 4 jurisdictions, in increments small enough that no single account would trigger a pattern flag. This took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, the system ran continuously in the background of my awareness, monitoring the Zhao Group's filing activity, their PR calendar, their executive travel schedules, the timing of their analyst calls. I had never worked this efficiently in my life. The irony was that I had always had the capacity for it. I had just been spending it on other people's projects. The system surfaced the Y family information on a Wednesday evening, between a position review and a market close. Gerald Y was my grandfather, a man I had never met, who had been tracking my location and professional activity for 11 years from a distance I had not known existed. The Y family held more private capital than most of the names on the wall at Chu Capital combined. My parents had not died in an accident. They had been killed in a takeover dispute that Gerald had lost, and he had hidden my identity afterward as the only protection he could offer a 4-year-old that did not require admitting the loss. I read this on a Wednesday evening in a rented office the size of a walk-in closet. I sent Gerald Y a message the following morning that I would like to meet, that I had questions but not accusations, and that I wanted access to the family's legal records from 15 years ago. He replied within an hour. He said, "Name the place." We met at a private club he had been a member of for 40 years. He looked like a man in his late 70s who had never considered the possibility that his choices were subject to review. He gave me access to the legal records. He did not apologize. He said at the end of the meeting, "You should know that the Y family's current position is your position when you are ready." I said, "I'll let you know when that's relevant." I walked out. I noted that I felt something when I stepped outside, not warmth, not anger, nothing as simple as either. Something more like the sensation of a room becoming larger than you thought it was, which is not always a comfortable feeling. I went back to work. The Zhao Group's financial team detected our position in the 7th week. Not the full picture, but enough of the surface that someone nervous asked the right question. Adrian moved fast. Within 10 days, the Zhao Group announced a public offering of new shares in their flagship, a move designed to dilute our position below the threshold where it could force an independent audit, and to flood the market with enough positive narrative to bury the debt story for another year. Selene called me at 7 in the morning. "They're pricing the offering in 3 weeks," she said. "If the anchor investor closes, we lose 40% of our leverage position." I ran the calculations. She was right. Before I could act, a financial journalist published a piece about unusual short interest in the Zhao Group's flagship, citing the shell entity structure independently. I had not given him the information. Someone else had. It did not matter. The story was in the market. Adrian had it partially suppressed, but the damage had already spread the way financial stories spread, slowly, then all at once. Then he did the thing that told me he was more nervous than I had assessed. He called Bernard Chu and told him I was the source of the leak. Bernard, who had smiled at Vivian's engagement announcement while I sat at the far end of his table, filed a defamation complaint within 48 hours and used 2 remaining relationships to freeze 2 of my accounts. I sat in the rented office at midnight looking at the frozen accounts and the revised position. I was not panicking. I noted that I was not panicking, and I noted that 6 months ago I would have been, and I found the comparison interesting. Selene came in at midnight with coffee and a printed summary of the revised numbers. "We can still win," she said, "but we need to reach the anchor investor before the offering closes. 8 days. I said, "I know." She said, "Tell me you have a way." I said, "I'm working on it." She looked at me for a moment. Then she sat down and started working too. The fund's managing director had been a guest lecturer at a conference I had attended 4 years earlier. He ran a mid-sized growth fund known for never taking positions they hadn't stress-tested from every angle, the kind of firm that walked away from good deals if the paperwork raised a single question they couldn't answer. I had asked a question after his talk. He had answered it with more thoroughness than the question strictly required, which told me something about how he thought. I sent him a message the following morning. I attached the documentation, the shell entity filings, the leverage analysis, the timeline of the concealment, all legally obtained, all presented as a professional courtesy from someone who believed he might be about to unknowingly anchor a structurally compromised offering. He did not reply for 36 hours. On the morning of the 37th hour, a regulatory filing appeared indicating the fund's withdrawal from the Zhao offering. No statement, no announcement, just the filing. I noted it. I went back to the numbers. The offering failed to close. Without the anchor, the institutional appetite was not there. The leak story had seeded enough uncertainty that the remaining investors declined to commit at the pricing level the Zhao Group needed. The offering was pulled. The Zhao Group put out a statement about market conditions. 2 weeks later, a second wave of reporting appeared, 3 separate outlets, independent analyses, the same shell entity structure. The debt position became the dominant narrative. The Zhao flagship's market cap dropped 31% in 9 trading days. The company entered a formal restructuring process 6 weeks after the offering collapse. Bernard Chu's personal investments, the private side agreement he had executed with the Zhao Group the previous year, the future he had attached to his daughter's marriage, took the kind of losses that change the shape of a person's life without being recoverable. The defamation complaint against me became, in his lawyer's words, inadvisable to pursue. It was quietly withdrawn. Adrian's flagship company went into restructuring. The spring wedding had no venue booked. Gerald Wise people contacted me in the 4th week of the restructuring. The ceremony took place in a conference room in a building Gerald owned. 3 lawyers, Gerald, me, and a document confirming my position as the legitimate heir to the Y family's principal holding company. Gerald said, "This is yours. The timing of what you do with it is your decision." I said, "I know. I did not publish this. I did not call anyone. I filed the document and went back to work. The name was not the point. What it gave me was a capital base and a set of legal instruments I had not had before." Adrian came to the office on a Tuesday. He came alone, no lawyers, no team, which told me he had already run out of leverage and knew it. He sat down across from me. He said, "What does it take to stop this?" I looked at him. I noted that I felt nothing in particular about his presence. Not satisfaction, not anger, not the complicated thing I might have expected to feel looking at the man who had taken Vivian's hand at my birthday dinner. Just a clear assessment of the situation. I said, "It stopped the moment your company entered restructuring. I don't have an ongoing position against you. There's nothing to stop." He said, "You understand what you've done." I said, "Yes." He said nothing for a moment, then he stood up. "This isn't finished." I said, "The restructuring administrator would disagree with you." He left. The meeting had lasted 11 minutes. I went back to work. Vivian called on a Thursday. I did not pick up. Her voicemail was 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. I listened to it once, the way you listen to something you need to fully understand before you decide what to do with it. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood how serious things had gotten. She said she thought I might want to talk and that she had always valued, she used that word, valued what we had. I deleted the voicemail. I noted that the deletion felt like nothing in particular. I noted that the nothing was its own kind of answer. 3 years ago, a 2-minute 40-second voicemail from Vivian would have rearranged my whole day. The fact that this one did not was not coldness. It was accuracy. She had told me, with the seating chart at my own birthday dinner, exactly how much I was worth in her accounting. I had filed it. The ledger was balanced. The Zhao flagship's assets went to auction through the restructuring process in the 8th month after the collapse. We submitted a bid through the Y family's investment vehicle. We were not the only bidder. We were the highest. We won at approximately 11 cents on the dollar relative to the company's valuation at the time Adrian had presented my work as his. Selene witnessed the signing. The document was 7 pages. I read each page before I signed it. This took 12 minutes. When I signed the last page, the room was quiet. Selene said, "Do you want coffee?" I said, "Yes." She went to make it. I sat with the signed document in front of me for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved at its usual pace. Deals, decisions, the ordinary architecture of people trying to convert what they had into something larger. The company I had just signed for was the company whose boardroom I had entered for the first time, 3 years ago, as Vivian's boyfriend. It was mine now. I did not feel triumph. I felt something closer to the satisfaction of a problem fully solved, the clean state that follows from a situation being taken to its logical conclusion without compromise. Selene came back with the coffee. She set it down and looked at the signed document. "So," she said, "what's next?" I looked out at the city. "There's a secondary acquisition I've been watching." I said, "The numbers are interesting." She sat down. She opened her laptop. We went back to work. I stayed in the office after she left. At some point I noticed that the system interface, which had been running continuously in my peripheral vision for nearly a year, was quiet. Not gone, but quiet, the way a tool becomes quiet when the task it was built for is finished. I thought about the man who had set his alarm early to make coffee for someone who was planning his humiliation at the same moment he was choosing which mug to use. I thought about the 462 late nights and the model on page 11. I thought about the 47-minute walk home through a city that had not noticed anything had changed. I tried to feel something for that version of myself. What I felt was closer to respect than pity. He had not been weak. He had been applying his intelligence to the wrong equation. The solution had always been there. He had just needed to stop solving for other people's comfort and start solving for what was actually true. I closed the system interface. Not because I was done with it, but because I didn't need it to tell me what came next. I picked up the coffee Selene had made. It was slightly cold. I drank it anyway. The city outside was doing what it always did. I had work to do.